Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm really excited to be here for today's recording because I've been trying to record this episode of the podcast for what seems like a couple of months. And I've had just such a busy beginning of the year. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you might recognize that this is a different room to the last room that I recorded in because I have moved house. Yes, again. For those of you who are long-term followers, you'll know that I've moved so many times in the last 4 years, I'm pretty sure. 5 years. I've moved like 6 times. But hopefully, this is the last one for a while. This is our very first home. We are in the home buyers market. We were really fortunate enough that last year we started a build process. So we built our house and we're in it, which is exciting. But for those of you who have no idea about building or you have built, either way, you'll either understand this or you won't get it at all. But the build process is like you just don't get an end date. They don't tell you until like the day before, like, oh, we can like do your final walkthrough today. And if you're happy with it, you can have your keys. So you don't really get a lot of notice. And it could be like estimated to be like originally our move-in date was going to be February. And then we were ready to go in December, which was so exciting pre-Christmas. And then there was an incident that I don't even want to talk about, but basically, our house got flooded and we had to pull it all out and redo it. So that was really, really disappointing. But that pushed our move-in date back to February. So we got to the end of February and it was still not ready and it was a shambles. And then all of a sudden it was ready. So there was no like lead up time in like knowing when this was going to happen. It kind of just like kept being this random, like I almost felt like it was like a fear of my imagination that I was ever going to move into this house. But we're in. I've moved the office in, the clinic is open. I actually did it over a weekend, so I didn't get any days off work to actually move it in and settle, which was like not a big deal, but that's a pretty big weekend when you completely move a house and completely unpack it and set it up ready to go. But that is why I haven't actually recorded this episode because it's just been so busy and doing things and then setting everything up and trying to catch up. So, I'm just complaining here about being busy. But I sent out the research spotlight email in November for this topic, which is fertility health. And I like to recap through the audio version because I know a lot of you really like listening to the audio version. Maybe you don't like subscribing to emails. Maybe you just hate reading. I don't know. But I like the audio version as well. So this is the audio version of the Research Spotlight email that went out in November. And if you haven't already checked out the website, all the Research Spotlight emails have been uploaded as posts. So I've got like a Research Spotlight blog post where you can go back and read any of them. So if you weren't on the email list, you can go do that. But all the topics are there. So I'm going to, as I do them, they'll be uploaded onto the website so that you can always come back, find some relevant research, maybe read up about a specific women's health topic, and then be able to kind of like, I guess, apply it in whatever way that you like. So super exciting. For me, I'm excited because I've been working on that website for ages and it feels like it's finally ready and uploaded and everything's good to go. So hopefully you've checked it out. But today's topic is fertility health and exercise. So this paper that we are looking today is called The Effect of Physical Activity on Fertility, a mini review. And basically I came across this in preparation for a weekend that I was going to Melbourne with the lovely ladies that are inside my business mentorship group. And I'd prepared this for like topics to talk about because I thought that's what we were going to do. Anyway, it turned out that we just went and drank heaps of coffee and had great food and had a bloody awesome time catching up and hanging out. And we actually didn't go over this. So I had this paper already ready to go and I was like, research spotlight email, I'll share it with that. And then turn it into this episode of the podcast or YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. So let's talk a little bit about this paper. The purpose of this review was to provide basically current understanding of exercise and its impact on fertility and recommendations on how to modify exercise depending on what cohort of person that you were dealing with. So they basically broke the review paper down into 3 different cohorts of people. which might be quite relevant to you depending on who you see for clients or who you'd like to see. But the three cohorts of people were healthy women trying to conceive who were presumed to be fertile, women with diagnosed polycystic ovary syndrome, and women undergoing assistive reproductive technologies, and in particular, IVF. So we've got the three categories of women. We're going to talk through each one because basically it went through each category and then outlined what the research, like all the different research papers that they'd come across and what they'd found for each particular group of people. So let's kick it off with the healthy women trying to conceive. I'm going to go through each point that was made, and then at the end we'll do take-home messages. So the first point was that runners versus sedentary women. Let's talk about that. So one particular study that they had in the review reported that 58% of regular runners were found to show menstrual cycle abnormalities compared to sedentary women. So only 9% of sedentary women actually had these cycle abnormalities. And this included presentations that were related to anovulation and insufficient luteal phase. So that was a luteal phase that's less than 10 days. Those who were ovulating, in the people who were ovulating and had sufficient luteal phase length, so they had 10 plus days, runners had lower levels of progesterone when compared to sedentary women. So we can see that potentially running has an impact on this progesterone level. The other thing they noted was that runners also showed lower levels of urinary metabolites of estradiol during the late luteal phase, suggesting that there was a possible inhibitory effect of exercise on follicle maturation. So we're really concerned about running and its effect on progesterone and estrogen in the cycle, and how that impacts ovulation and luteal phase length. So that was really interesting because it was the only thing I read that felt like the running was worse than being sedentary. We all know, obviously, sedentary lifestyle is not that great, but I'd love to know more about the sedentary women, like, what their health was like in general. But anyway, that's point number one. The second thing they found was that energy balance was associated with parameters measured in the studies and was important to consider for fertility optimization. So the anovulatory cycles were associated with lower energy balance than other types of cycles. So if we're thinking about, is this person ovulating well, we really need to consider energy balance. They also found that women who undertook 2 hours per week of vigorous exercise were 16% less likely to fall pregnant compared to sedentary women, even when they had adjusted for BMI and other healthy behaviors. That percentage increases as time in vigorous exercise increases. So vigorous intensity exercise, actually not ideal. Moderate exercise increased the odds of conceiving with just 2 hours per week, increasing chances of pregnancy by 15%. So intensity plays a role here. Women who self-reported higher levels of physical activity were 1.5 times more likely to experience subfertility or involuntary childness compared to women with a low physical activity index. So volume here is also a problem. Now, when we're looking at energy deficit, so exercise and diet, is hugely impacts fertility and was seen in a study that compared the degree of energy deficit across 3 different groups. So we've got severe energy deficit, moderate energy deficit, and mild energy deficit. And then they also had a control group, which was no deficit. So 85% of women assigned to the severe and moderate caloric deficit group experienced at least one luteal phase defect. So here we go, energy balance, issues with ovulation. And ovulation was also more prevalent in the moderate to severe group. Kind of makes sense there. And the rates of anovulation and luteal phase defects remained low in the mild deficit and control group. So, you're better off obviously not being on a diet. And then basically they'd said that detrimental effects of vigorous exercise on fertility might be improved through increased caloric intake. So if people are, well, we'll talk about that in the takeaways, but we can see that this is something that we might need to talk about our clients with if they're high exercisers, is also their diet. If you do not know a lot about diet and nutrition and you are interested in learning about this, there are Spark sessions on the website. So these are super structured, expert-led interviews where we talk a lot about the practical application of topics. There is a fertility, nutrition, considerations Spark session, which talks about all the requirements that we should be looking out for our clients. So this is for exercise professionals, and it's mostly about guidelines and red flags to be concerned about. I would highly recommend that if you are interested in learning a little bit more about this, because it is clearly an issue when we combine exercise and diet together. So we really need to be able to recognize when someone may need some changes in there, maybe when they need to be referred out to, or even the education around what's important for that person. So let's talk about the key takeaways from this group. There's two. One of them being that women that really do want to continue that vigorous exercise, if they're trying to conceive, really need to be thinking about their caloric intake. And on the days that they are training, they probably, or they should be, increasing their energy intake according to the energy expenditure from their exercise. So we really don't want to see a deficit for these people. It's really important for that menstrual cycle regularity, and also, optimizing ovulation. The second takeaway is that women with any luteal phase defect should be doing more moderate based exercise. So we should be replacing vigorous exercise with moderate exercise. So we know that from like that running group or even the higher intensity groups. And it might be even more beneficial when it's done in that follicular phase, so that we can improve follicle maturation. So we know that has effects on the estrogen and progesterone levels. So think about those two and how you would modify your exercise programming for the people that are more healthy, versus clinical population. Let's move on to the second group. So we've got the clinical population, which is the group with PCOS. They've been diagnosed. This had limited studies in regard to this group that was just exercise. So a lot of them do like diet interventions or other things with them. So we have to also keep that in mind. But there were a couple of key takeaways from this one. So the first one was that as little as 30 minutes of vigorous exercise per week can significantly increase chances of conception among overweight women with PCOS. So vigorous here is actually super helpful for this population, whereas the healthy pop, probably not. When we're comparing vigorous to moderate intensity exercise, each hour per week of vigorous intensity exercise was associated with a 7% reduction risk of ovulatory infertility. This remained even after we're adjusting for BMI. So is definitely superior than moderate intensity exercise when we're thinking about ovulation. Exercise, regardless of weight reductions, overperformed diet intervention, even when the diet intervention had weight loss, in terms of ovulation rates. So there is a very strong association between vigorous exercise and lowered risk of ovulatory infertility. This is exciting. Exercise, I always feel like exercise is a little bit inferior to diet. When I read the research, it's always like exercise and diet was better than just exercise alone. But, this one, exercise wins. So that's exciting. Now, they also had, there was a couple of systemic reviews that were inside this mini review that they'd mentioned. And this one particular systemic review and meta-analysis examined health benefits of exercise for PCOS more broadly. So this is where we can now focus, how do we improve the general health of PCOS so that we have all the health markers optimized, and then that has an association with any sort of, fertility outcomes. So they had broadly found that vigorous aerobic and resistance training led to the greatest improvements in insulin resistance, which I think we probably already know. Also, just to note, if you want to actually learn a lot more about PCOS programming, there is a Spark session on this too. I would highly recommend checking that one out. We talk about phenotypes of exercise, PCOS, and then how to program properly, how to build people up to these levels. So check that out on the website if you're interested. The second point in that systematic review and meta-analysis was that vigorous intensity had greatest benefits on body mass. 8 of the 16 studies measured reproductive outcomes found favorable changes in one or more parameters with exercise. So resistance training appeared in this particular topic or category, shall we say, appeared to have the greatest reproductive benefits relative to aerobic exercise alone. And this was particularly in reference to free androgen index or hormone levels. So one study that was in that review compared HIIT training with strength training, and found that strength training led to reductions in AMH levels and free androgen index and increases in sex hormone binding globulin. So none of which of those were actually seen to be changed or improved in the HIT group. So AMH and free androgen index are generally higher in those with PCOS, and reductions in both can be really, really beneficial for reproductive health. And increased sex hormone binding globulin reduces free androgen levels, which can also really help to improve symptoms and hormonal profiles in women with PCOS. So strength training for the win here. And the last point in regard to the PCOS group was that long-term consistent training has the greatest reduction in free androgen levels, which was suggested at more than 50 hours, being that associated with these changes. So we know that consistent exercise is also super important, but obviously that's what the paper mentioned. So the key take-home messages for the PCOS group were vigorous aerobic exercise and strength training appeared to be the most directly related to reproductive benefits. Maximum benefits may take up to 50 hours. So that would be like, I don't know, like a month or so of vigorous exercise. And the third key takeaway was that exercise benefits fertility through mechanisms other than weight loss. So we saw that a lot of those benefits were improved regardless of BMI. And not that I love BMI as a measure, but, studies mention that. And the chances of conceiving are improved, even in the absence of weight loss, which is exciting. So we know exercise does play a role in lots of changes to health outside of just weight management. So that's your PCOS group. Like I said earlier, if you want to learn more about PCOS, you don't know a huge amount, or you want to know a bit more about the actual practical application of it and programming for it, then head to my website, hereducation.com.au, and check out the PCOS SPARK session. Let's move on to the last group. It's women undergoing assistive reproductive technology, and more specifically around IVF. And to be quite honest with you, there is not a lot of research in there, but also mentioned in this review. And it was a little bit like, oh, this is not really what I wanted to read. Like research is funny, isn't it? You feel like it's really hard to not read something and go, oh, why couldn't it say what I think it should be doing? Doesn't actually prove this. So we always have to take research with a grain of salt, I think personally. But anyway, this is what it says about IVF. There was four key takeaways for IVF or reproductive technologies. Most research has found neither physical activity duration nor the intensity to be associated with fertility-related outcomes, which is disappointing, I think, because I know that there's so much power in exercise, but in regard to the outcome of IVF, nothing's been shown. Not that they can really test on this because it's totally immoral, but anyway, physical activity during IVF has either no effect or a positive effect on pregnancy outcomes. So either or, 50-50 chance. Well, not a 50-50 chance. There was nothing mentioned about statistics there. I'm just saying that as a figure of speech. The third point was that the potential negative effects of exercise on ovulation during natural cycles that we've talked about before are no longer observed when ovulation is pharmacologically regulated. So when we're hormonally intervening with ovulation, the effect of exercise negatively, so I would say all that higher intensity, vigorous stuff, if you're healthy, actually doesn't apply. So that's something that was interesting and I'd like to read more on. And the last point was that it basically recommended that women undergoing ART can continue their normal activities. So I was actually quite surprised with that section. I personally change a lot of my programming when it comes to fertility or IVF and fertility interventions, because there's a lot of changes to the human because of the hormonal interventions, or should we say hormonal regulations, or I don't know what they're taking, and the energy changes, motivation changes, comfort changes, and their level of confidence in exercise is not quite strong. They're spending a lot of money, but they're also usually quite people who are most emotionally challenged through their fertility health. So doing anything that they feel worried about, to me, is pointless, because if anything was to happen, they'll blame it on the exercise. And we know that exercise is not the problem, but it's definitely something that you also need to support in terms of confidence levels for them. So I do actually change my programming a lot during stim cycles, during either retrieval, implantation, 2 week wait, all that stuff. So it really depends on the individual and what they're doing and mentally preparing them for that. So whatever that looks like for the person. Some people are super happy to change and want to. Some people don't want to change and want to optimize things. So we've got to talk about them individually. So just keep that in mind, even though the paper says they can continue their normal activities. I think you need to really think about it from the person that you're seeing. One thing that I did note in this paper, though, that I really wish they talked about was the relationship between physical activity and endometriosis and the severity of that and pregnancy rates. But there wasn't, which was a little bit disappointing. And it did actually, I think it actually did mention that there is an important role here, but there's nothing really out there from a research perspective yet that talks about endo, exercise, and pregnancy outcomes. So I'd love to see more research on this because my whole clinic, I see so many endometriosis clients. That's pretty much my main population at the moment. And a lot of them are coming because they're trying to get off the pill, or they're taking their Mirena out and they're wanting to manage their condition better, reduce pain, be able to exercise for their health because they're going to be moving into this trying to conceive window and hoping to fall pregnant. So I'd love to see all of like that, what that journey would look like in the sense of the research, but unfortunately haven't yet found any, although I haven't dug into it recently, so maybe I should keep looking. But I will definitely be sure to share some of that in the future if I come across anything. But if you want to read more about this paper or this mini review, I have all the notes, all the references in the show notes. So you can definitely check that out if you would like to read more about it. But that was basically what the paper said. And I've just kind of like summarized it. So interesting though, it's not. I know I normally like my passion is like lots of pelvic health, but I love women's health in general. And if you aren't already aware, there's a lot coming this year for her education. And one of the topics that will be, I want to say, put together in a collaborative program, which you might have heard about that I'm doing this year, is fertility health. So we're going to have like a mini program on learning more about fertility health and how to program for this, the exercise prescription. There'll be lots of case studies involved. So if you're interested in that, make sure that you're on the emailing list because there will be lots of information going out this year about courses that will be live and they're delivered live. So make sure you're on the list so you don't miss out. But that will be towards the end of this year. And we have the lovely Kiara from Seed Exercise Physiology who will be presenting that one. She's so knowledgeable in the space, especially with hormone health and women's health in general. So I'm so excited to be sharing that one. But make sure that you don't miss out on that one. It'll be all over my socials. But if you want to really learn more and dive into the fertility space, that will be the place for you to go. Otherwise, that is a wrap on this research spotlight. I hope that that's given you some insight into maybe how you can start implementing exercise with your clients. But otherwise, thank you for listening wherever you are. Don't forget to like and review and share the show. It really helps me grow this so that I can put together more education for you and improve the women's health space in a sense of how we as clinicians are seen. So thanks again. I will see you in the next one. Bye.